honorable members of parliament, state executive council members, state assemblymen and assemblywomen, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Alhamdulillah, all praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His blessing that we are all here today in this seminar, economic seminar, pathway to a better future of Malaysia. On behalf of Institut Darul Ehsan, we would like to thank and welcome all guests for making your time to be with us today. Congratulations also to all the organizing committee for this successful event. To put on record, this seminar is jointly organized by Institut Darul Ehsan in collaboration with the Office of Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, the opposition leader of Malaysia. The program today aims to explore the public policy solution that will help Malaysia overcoming the persistent challenges for Malaysia, covering process from the COVID-19 pandemic that has stricken the whole world, while simultaneously dealing with the current post-normal conflict that has gone beyond our control. Climate change that leads to many unprecedented events, regional conflicts, and deglobalization are amongst the few of many conflicts we have to deal with. Although some might appear beyond control and bleak, we have no choice but to deal with it. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the floor, we have put forward a request to the panelists to consider and propose new ways of thinking and analyzing about policy and action that recognize the realities of this post-normal world, which is in constant crisis across a web of interrelated issues. With no further ado, I welcome to the stage our moderator today, Professor Dr. Muhammad Aslam bin Muhammad Hanif from the Department of Economy, International Islamic University, Malaysia, to introduce our panelists today. Again, thank you very much for all your attendance today. Professor Dr. Aslam, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and a very good afternoon to everyone. Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar, Prof. Ridwan, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and representatives from embassies in Malaysia, members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to IDE and the organizers for inviting me to moderate the session. I'm really worried because 10 minutes already up and we've got only 1 hour to do this panel. We really have a lot of things to do, especially since that Ismail has asked the panelists to provide solutions and they're all going to have 10 minutes to do it in the panel that we had. Almost a year ago, in Malaysia, we were almost exactly a year ago. The Yang Tuan Agong was going to appoint a new Prime Minister. I remember it because it was near Merdeka Day. And we had an article that talked about a Merdeka gift to Malaysians. And I remember in that short article that I wrote, I said that, we hope that this Merdeka gift would include, among others, a slim and trim cabinet. A cabinet made up of, cross-party members. A cabinet with experts and professionals who would address, among others, governance and legal reforms. It's been 12 months, and I think we've gone through these 12 months Some good, some bad. We have seen some reforms going through, but we still have a very huge cabinet. Nothing slim and trim about the cabinet for the last 2+ years. We didn't have a cross-party cabinet, but we had an MOU in which maybe that MOU was able to bring in some of those changes that we hope to see. Jeff and me at the same time were also involved in the project in which we were looking at alternative models for the country. And we were looking at the social market economy at that point in time. There were a list of things that we wanted to talk about, and especially Jeff, I think he has been very active in the last year or more. You know, almost every day we see him with his articles. The future of work, productivity and competitiveness, the state of micro, small and medium enterprises in Malaysia and the impact of COVID-19 measures, the role of the state, especially in terms of provision of public or social goods, healthcare, and the complex issues related to upgrading our relatively neglected health sector, social welfare and social protection, and long-term well-being of the rakyat, especially things related to the abilities to save and retirement life after retirement. And we had even many seminars and webinars on this. 12 months over is the worst over. I think we may discuss this and the speakers may talk about this. We are about to turn 60 next year, and 60 means Malaysia. The Malaysia project is about to turn 60 next year, and we are about to celebrate our Hari Merdeka in a few days' time. And in all our plans, right from the beginning of the planning eras in Malaysia, national unity has been identified as the overriding goal of all major policies. The first Malaysia plan, the second Malaysia plan with new economic policy talked about national unity in very, very clear terms as the overriding goal that we want to achieve in Malaysia. Vision 2020 that was announced in 1991 talked about a united Bangsa Malaysia. Yeah, so this overriding goal of national unity has always been there. Our journey has been a journey of ups and downs. We still rely on a low-skill, low-wage labor model, which is not sustainable. We have managed to diversify our economy, but we are still, studies have shown that maybe we don't have a manufacturing base that is stable. We've been declining in the last few years. Our growth rates have certainly declined. From the 7% plus in the 1990s decade, we now have just about maybe 4% in the last 10 to 12 years. Poverty rates have declined, but new forms of poverty have maybe risen. Inequality using Gini coefficient of income has always shown an improvement, but maybe we need to look at wealth inequalities, asset inequalities. And these are new forms of inequality. Therefore, we have a mixed performance of the country, but overall, I think for a heterogeneous country, Malaysia, we've done well, but we can do much better, and we should do much better. We need a change. We need a new model. We can't tweak the old one. We can't fiddle with the old one, as some commentators have said. We need a new model. We need change. That, I think, is what our session here is supposed to be doing today. We have with us 3 panelists who are going to spend about 10 minutes each giving some ideas on what they think are maybe the 2 or 3 most important changes that they think need to be done in Malaysia if we are to have a better future. And I'll call each one of them. Jeffrey Williams from the Malaysia University of Science and Technology. Jeff, please. He, as mentioned earlier, has been in the media a lot, commenting. In fact, I remember somebody even telling me, who is this, Mat Saleh giving everyday reports on Malaysian economy? But Jeff has been here for more than 20 years, if I'm not mistaken, in Malaysia, and he knows the Malaysian economy and probably voices out his opinions louder than us. So welcome. We have Datuk William Ng, please. The chairman of Samantha, which is the Small and Medium Enterprises of Malaysia, Association of Malaysia. He is an entrepreneur for at least 2 decades and involved with the entrepreneurship development program in various levels. And finally, we have Dr. Seri Anwar Ibrahim. Needs no introduction. He doesn't want to be introduced as X, so he's just economist, but I think everyone knows him. Respected panelists, we have very limited time, and how we're going to do this is 10 minutes each to each one of you. And then I'm hoping to get a question from the floor for each one of our panelists. And then we will give them another 3 to 4 minutes maybe to answer that question and to maybe wrap up and give their own opinions. We hope to end by about 1 p.m. before we go for lunch, and then I'm told that after lunch we will have a presentation and a speech by Datuk Seri Anwar, and then we will again open our session for interaction. So this is what we plan, and with that I have the pleasure now to invite anybody who wants to volunteer. So Datuk William, you will be our first speaker, and with the session is yours.
Mr. Moderator. Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Professor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Rizwan Othman, of course my co-panelists, Professor Jeffrey and Dr. Musari, Moderator Professor Aslam, Excellencies, various YBs, Member of Parliament, State Councillors, State Assemblymen, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing the small SMEs to go first. I do have a slide, if you can put it on. While I'm not an economist, what we have prepared today really is some insight, some findings that we have on what is happening right now to the SMEs, and of course some suggestions, what can we do moving forward for our SMEs. A quick introduction to Samantha. Samantha is the oldest SME association in the country. We are 26 years old today, and 3,000 members. We are known as a manufacturing SME because a huge number of our members are from the manufacturing sector. If you can move to the next slide. So there's a quick intro about Samantha. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, just a quick intro to the landscape of the SMEs in the country. If you look at the numbers, SME businesses comprise 97.4%. 97.4% of all businesses in the country, right? And we contribute 37.4% of the GDP in the country. It was at 38%, and at one point we were aiming to hit 40%. But because of the pandemic, the numbers went down because, as you know, the pandemic actually hit the SMEs disproportionately tougher than any other sector. 83.8% of our SMEs are in the service sector, 47.8%, or half, or every 1 out of 2 Malaysians work for an SME, if you count in the entrepreneur himself. Very important is the number at the bottom right, and that is 1% growth among SMEs in 2021, despite a partial reopening of the economy, versus 4.4% among larger companies. Again, very disproportionate growth among the SMEs versus the economy overall. So where is the problem? And therefore, this is the way that we have done last month, and these are some of the things that we found. Next, please. The impact of pandemic to SMEs, needless to say, 1 out of 3 has closed down permanently or temporarily. The pandemic has created a severe liquidity crunch for SMEs. There are many bankers here today, so we'll talk a bit about that later. Recovery 1% versus 4.4%, and very crucially, labor productivity is much lower than pre-pandemic level, despite the recovery. Right, the next step, please. So again, next. And next. What are the top challenges? There were supposed to be 3, I put in 1 yesterday. Number 1, recovery is very slow, with only about half of all SMEs are saying that they are seeing recovery. Some of us think that, look, SMEs are all doing very well, but the statistics is saying otherwise. That only about half are saying that business is booming, another half are still struggling. These are not just sector dependent. We thought, oh, it's sector dependent. The tourism is not opening, the restaurants are not doing so well, but it's across all sectors. We are hearing from SMEs saying that, look, the economy is recovering, but we are still struggling. So where is the lapse right there? Labor shortage is very severe. 90% of all SMEs say they're short of workers, not just foreign workers. We've seen a lot in the public about how tough it is to get foreign workers. In fact, I think it came out about a month ago, headline of the Star that says pay for interview. Right? Pay for interview. It is so tough to even get foreign workers in a sense. But it goes far beyond that. It's not just foreign workers. Even local workers are hard to come by. Working capital remains challenging. And the last one is the most important. A lot of people think that a lot of SMEs collapsed because of lockdown. Partially true. But the reason most SMEs collapsed during the pandemic is because of the low margin, driven by the low productivity among the SMEs. As you can see, the statistics are right there. This is 2021 numbers, 70,000 per worker versus 109,000 for non-SMEs. So productivity in SMEs are 30% lower than other businesses. Next slide, please. So this is what we call a perfect storm. Number 1, we were hit by a sudden increase of the minimum wage. Not 10%, not 20%, but 25% all at one go. What this means is not just those who are earning 1,000 being bumped up to 1,005, but across every level of employment, even executives and managers are now demanding for higher pay because of this minimum wage increase. So a lot of political uncertainty, and it's affecting the FDI, the DDI, and capital expenditure. So the economy is reopening, businesses are booming, orders are coming in. Yet many SMEs are telling us they do not want to spend on increasing their production line. They do not want to spend on renewing their equipment. They do not want to spend on upgrading the facilities, precisely because they're not sure what is happening politically, what is happening globally in terms of the economy. I think this is an important issue to address. Rising cost of raw materials, severe labor shortage, interest rate hikes, and we are foreseeing another round of interest rate hike. And of course, with the ESG compliance and transitional costs towards ESG compliance. Next. So we all thought that, look, if you have this huge labor crunch, shouldn't digital transformation be the key? And there lies the problem. The nature of SME South means that any form of digital transformation will be very slow, if not impossible. One of the reasons why larger companies, MNCs, some of you are from larger companies, outsource your work to SMEs is precisely because you do not want the labor-intensive work to be within your company. So by definition, a lot of SMEs will absorb this labor-intensive work that cannot be automated, that cannot be digitalized. So where do we go now? And as we look at the numbers, not only the numbers low, I don't foresee them growing or leapfrogging anytime soon because of various issues. Cost is of course among them, technology is another, and of course the mindset is another issue. So what do we do? So how do we support our 1 million SMEs? I will go a bit faster, moderator, yes. So I'll go through some of the suggestions, if you don't mind. Next slide, please. So number 1, How do we relieve the labor crunch? By doing two things. We need budgetary intervention to support employment of local talents for SMEs. By nature, local workers do not want to work for SMEs if they have a choice. What can we do to encourage them to work for SMEs? Secondly, how do we remove the bureaucratic impediments to hiring foreign workers in 3P jobs? We are not asking for jobs that Malaysians want. We are talking about jobs that Malaysians do not want. Next, please. How do we stimulate business growth? Budgetary intervention to support capital expenditure. And of course, stronger pre-export financing. Many SMEs are getting orders, we just have run out of cash to produce the goods, to buy the raw materials, to send them overseas. Next, please. Overcoming digital disruption, grants and hand-holding for digital transformation, and stronger regulatory framework for monopolistic disruptors. We cannot say that just because we're supporting innovation, we're going to support any form of disruptor. One good example, of course, is the duopoly of Foodpanda and Grab. Many SMEs are telling us, look, while they're getting additional orders, the margin extremely compressed because we're being asked 28 to 32% of our margin going to them. So that has to change. Next, preparing for the future, training and support for ESG. We need to narrow the skills mismatch. The labor crunch will resolve itself over the next 1 year, but the skill mismatch will continue and will continue. So we need to do something about that. We need to speed up transition to market-led financial regime using alternative data. As we know now, most SMEs did very badly the last 2 years. Many are now going to the bank saying, look, can we have a loan? The bank said, look, you don't have data, you're losing money last year, we cannot give you the loan despite you having orders. So that has to change. We need a new way of assessing suitability of SMEs for financing. I'll skip the rest, and then I have got 2 more slides. Alright, digitalization, IR 4.0. There's a lot of talk about IR 4.0 and how we move SMEs towards IR 4.0. In reality, we're just not doing it. So don't talk about IR 4.0, talk about how do we move SMEs into the digital economy first. And when we move SMEs to the digital economy, by the nature of the economy itself, we will be able to force, or rather encourage SMEs to adopt some of the IR 4.0. Next, please. So finally, a vibrant, sustainable SME sector is crucial to Malaysia precisely for this reason. There are many YBs here and many aspiring YBs. I would say, very simply, 1 million SMEs. If you take the entrepreneur himself, the husband or wife, and 1 children, we're talking about 3 million workers right there. So you know how important we are. 50% of all Malaysians operate or work in SMEs. 37.4% of GDP is from SMEs, and of course every FDI involvement or investment involves the availability of support infrastructure as provided by the SMEs. I think with time running up, that's what I will say for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. William. Apologies, we always constrain, time is always an issue, but certainly we see 2 main: growth as a major challenge, and also equity. Although I think it wasn't in the presentation, out of the SME space, micro enterprises actually make up huge numbers out of that, and that's, I think, a major issue in terms of equity. The growth overall is just 1% for SMEs, and I think maybe it's not even within the SME themselves. So major challenges, and some points were highlighted. Jeff, your 10 minutes starts now.
Okay, good afternoon. 10 minutes, good luck with that. I'm an academic. Datuk Seri was just telling me about your speeches and in comparison to mine. So I'll try to stick to 10 minutes. First, let me thank everybody for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to see so many friends. It's extraordinary how many of my friends are MPs. Even more extraordinary how many are lawyers. I think that's it's more worrying. I want to talk about some economic issues which I think are very pressing now and will be particularly pressing in the coming months, but also in the coming years. I don't want to talk too much about the general macroeconomic situation, because I understand that Sari will talk a little bit about the general macroeconomic situation. But what I want to emphasize is looking back at what we have gone through, not just here in Malaysia, but also globally, in terms of the pandemic, of course, and the lockdown and the consequences of the pandemic, some of which William just mentioned in terms of SMEs, the impact of SMEs, is that we have seen some very significant structural changes in terms of the economy, but also in terms of what Sam was saying in terms of equity, in terms of the employment landscape, and in terms of how the overall economy is likely to work in the future, which is, in my view, somewhat different to how it has been working in the past. So let me start with the biggest structural problem that we have, which is a direct consequence of the lockdown. And I've written an article directly about this today in FMT. The article is entitled "Celebrating Merdeka in Poverty." And it emphasizes the impact of the withdrawals from the EPF in particular, and the effect that that has had on the depletion of the pension funds for millions of Malaysians. Now, we know about this from the EPF itself, because the EPF has been really very open and very transparent about the impact on its own members. But the point I wanted to make this morning, and you can see all of the data that we've put there in terms of the analysis, is that when we look at formal pension cover, EPF, LTAT, or KWAP, or even private pension cover, this accounts for only 57% of the total Malaysian population, and a big chunk of people, 43%, are not in any form of formal pension system at all. So what this means is that the devastation that EPF have been quite open in telling us about the effect on EPF members is much worse when you extend this across the overall population. Some of the indicators, for example, people, it's something like 73% of people have less than 10,000 ringgit in their account, which is equivalent to 42 ringgit per month for your pension. 42 ringgit per month. This represents millions and millions of people. Of those who are currently 54, they have enough money in their account on average to give them a pension of 156 ringgit a month. Remember that the poverty line indicator for household poverty is above 2,000 ringgit, and for food is above 1,000 ringgit. So this isn't sufficient even for them to reach what's nowhere close to the poverty level in terms of food poverty. Now, for me, this is not just a terrible social problem that people will face as they get older. It's also a terrible economic problem, because it has long-term implications for the growth potential of the economy. It means that increasingly large numbers of people will have no income into the future. And of course, it means that there has to be a solution. There has to be a proposal on the table in order to be able to provide these people. And there isn't at the moment. And that's a big gap. And anybody developing future policies, anybody hoping to be elected at the next election, needs, in my view, to be able to provide a solution to that problem. Because it affects not just millions, but potentially tens of millions of Malaysians. And it needs to be addressed now. Now, there are many proposals. We put some proposals here onto the table. There are various different alternatives to dealing with it. But what's most important is that we start that discussion now. We start that discussion openly, honestly, and straightforwardly. The second area I wanted to look at or emphasize is this issue of subsidies, and this issue of targeted subsidies, the total subsidy cost and the total, the long-term implications. It reflects also on the pension issue, because subsidies should not only be viewed as a way of controlling inflation. In that sense, they've done their job, but they are also a part of social protection and welfare. And we've heard a number of times this issue of targeted subsidies, and yet, despite the fact we have heard about this, the importance of targeted subsidies, we still don't have a solution to this targeted subsidy problem, right? The most recent discussions we've had involve targeting particular products through some sort of electronic voucher, through e-wallets. Let me tell you categorically, this is by far the most stupid idea, and by far the most stupid way of targeting subsidies. What this means is, if you want your product to be targeted, to be part of the subsidy, you have to be on the list. How are you going to get on the list? Who makes the decision to get on the list? Some civil servant makes the decision to get on the list. Where are you going to buy these targeted items from? Of course, from particular selective outlets. Big name supermarkets, big name franchise, but not the mom and pop shops. Not the Pasar Mana, right? Not the anti-selling nasi lemak in the morning to make sure that you have something in your stomach for breakfast. Not that guy, that wonderful guy selling donuts for 10 cents to make sure that people have access. You can't use your e-wallet with somebody like that. So then, there is another opportunity for corruption. How are you going to, where are you going to buy it from? And the e-wallet system itself. The process of putting, using the money for particular products to a particular e-wallet system, how do you get that preference for the e-wallet? What if you don't have that e-wallet? Again, massive amounts of opportunity for corruption, massive amounts of opportunity for failure, massive amounts of opportunity for people to make money at the expense of the most vulnerable. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. But there is a much simpler idea, which is simple cash transfers. Simple cash transfers put money in people's pockets for them to spend as they choose. That's it. Simple as that. No intermediary, no e-wallet, no one making money when you're making the purchase. And it can be done overnight, because the government already has the list of people who should be the recipients through the Bantuan schemes, which we have been running since Britain, right? So we have all of the data. So that type of thing is urgent in my view, because we need to address the subsidy issue. It needs to be done quickly, okay? Two more issues, which I hope we can discuss separately, but I'll do it very quickly. Another issue which is extremely important and extremely pressing is student loans. The PTPTN system was unsustainable before the lockdown, and it has not got better. It has got worse. According to the public domain data, PTPTN has enough money for 2 more years. And after that, there is no more money left. And that needs to be addressed immediately, and it needs to be addressed in the context of my own field, which is full reform of the private higher education system. And the final thing, and I hope we can discuss it in the conversation, KAIRI. And KAIRI's insistence on the increase in health expenditure. Yes, we need more health expenditure, for sure. But as KAIRI said, this is very much some animals, all animals are equal and some are more equal than others. He was talking about Animal Farm, and George Orwell was talking about pigs at trough. Right? I'm all for extra money into the health service, but not until you deal with the corruption at the heart of the health service, and particularly at the heart of the procurement system in the health service. Then, fix that first, then give them the money. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Pensions, life after retirement, subsidies, and then health as a final issue. And I think implied in this is the importance of governance. And I think Datuk Seri is well versed with governance issues and being with GLCs and so on. So, Datuk Seri, the floor is yours to address maybe some of those things that were mentioned as well.
Terima kasih Ketua Komisi Hormat Datuk Seri Anwar, Ketua Pembangkang Tuan Yang Berhormat I have my ahli parliament in the crowd, and also ex-ahli parliament, so that is also the one speaking here, is also ex-ahli parliament. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. So I actually took the cue from the organizers because the team was actually towards a pathway for better Malaysia. So I thought speaking last, I should be a bit of a party pooper and be somewhat cautionary, but then the earlier was equally pessimistic and dour in terms of the outlook. But nonetheless, I'm going to take the view of if people in this room, in this hall, wants to formulate a pathway towards a better Malaysia, then my proposition this afternoon is to say you have to consider three, in my view, for now, obstacles or challenges that needs to be removed if we are ever going to get into a better pathway in Malaysia's economic and therefore the whole economic well-being of the citizen. For the longest time, I'm going to say something that a lot of people may not agree. I think one of the key problems that we've had, because at the time of independence, we inherited a colonial economy that was very much based on plantation economy. So the relationship between land and labor and capital was defined at that point. And that defined all other economic and social institutions in the country. By 1974, somebody upstairs was very kind to us, and we were endowed with oil and gas. And that turned us into not just a resource-based economy, not just a plantation-based economy in terms of relationship between factors of production, but it also gave us this potential curse. And I thought that added on another element of this resource and rent-based, not rent in terms, this is the economic rent-based, rent-dominant economy that we've seen. And that influenced and defined everything. It defined the political economy of the country. It defined how we decide how to finance government and how we decide what to spend on and things of those sorts. And it also basically defined the footprint and the very visible hand of government in the economy. You know, the new economic policy evolved to the point that the policy instrument was actually rent. At the later half of the policy, rent distribution became a policy prescription. So we got to that point where the economic institution were mainly extractive, it was mainly resource-based, and because it was resource-based, it wasn't the system of governance on the resource-based economy is very different from a governance of a non-resource-based economy. A non-resource-based economy, the public finance and the accountability of public finance is very different than the governance of a resource-based economy. The resource-based economy, the decision about Petronas can just be made in the offices in Putrajaya without having going to the population, to the voters themselves. So until and unless we remove we move away from this resource and rent-based economy, I think we're not going to get very far along towards moving towards a better future. You know, there was an earlier, about a decade ago, a report, question mark, from rents to riches. It was looking at extractive industries across many countries and looking at whether resource-based economies can actually develop beyond a certain level, for Malaysia, beyond middle income. Now, Malaysia was ranked, if you look at extractive industries per capita, Malaysia is ranked up there per capita. And they did not count palm oil, which I do count as a plantation sort of economy. They only count oil and gas. And Malaysia is up there in terms of per capita extractive industries output. This is really together with the likes of North America, Canada, Australia, but also the likes of Russia and the Middle East and so on. But if you look at the same data, and if you look at exports of commodities, then countries like Canada, the US, Australia are removed from this because basically they don't export much of those things. But we still are highly dependent on exports of commodities. And these commodities in that case was just oil and gas. So we have a long way to go to remove this thing. But the problem of removing this thing, because you know this much more than anybody else, is there are real vested interests in this, to change this. And it has evolved to the point where the vested interests are not just narrow interests, they are broad interests. In many ways, the momentum to preserve this is a national interest momentum. You cannot do stuff to eliminate or hurt the plantation sector because PNB is a major player in that. Tabung Haji is a major player in that. You can't do much to oil and gas or petrochemicals because Petronas is in there. The treasury depends on those things. So that becomes a major problem that until and unless we move away from that, we're going to have a problem. Now, this relates to the second point, which is actually why the economy is domesticating. Why you see the things that you see. Why growth has halved from about 7 point something up to the Asian financial crisis to about 4%, half of that since then, since in the 21st century. Why in the last 10 years, ringgit basically has gone through a structural decline. If you look at it, after the depegging, it was below 4, now has stayed above 4 since maybe 2012, 2013. Why we have the inequality that Jeff mentions, even before the withdrawal, the distribution of Caruman in KWSP was horrible. The withdrawal made it worse. Why we had that? If you look at the ownership distribution of ASB, it's even worse than the distribution of EPF. And why do we have all these disparities? Partly because you have this big plantations, oil and gas, and FDI manufacturing, of course, that does all the exporting. And then you're left behind with this hollow, big Malaysian, locally domestic-based economy, which doesn't give much income, actually. That's why you have the outcome that you have. So what has happened is actually, even SMEs, William would have told you that actually a lot of SMEs are still domestic-based. So as income, median household income is just like 7,000 median. And you've got businesses which are created on the supply side to cater to a demand which at a median household of 7,000 ringgit and not exporting and not exportable. So the pool of supply and demand is just playing within the constraint of whatever the purchasing power domestically there is. And therefore we get into this cycle. So the other solution is actually, I agree with Datuk William, we have to not just move away from this plantation resource base, but move away from big government-led stuff, big conglomerates, into smaller stuff. And they have to create products and services that are tradable. So we have come down, as you say, at the Asian financial crisis, the total trade to GDP was about 200. That means over 200%. That means export plus imports is about more than twice the size of GDP. Right now, we're just down to about 120% of GDP. So we have domesticated. If we keep on domesticating like this, I think we're going to have a serious problem because you need something else to change things, and that something else is actually external demand. But in order to cater to external demand, you need products, you need local products, local Malaysian products, and that has its own connotation in terms of human resources and so on. Now, the third thing, and this is very relevant to the politicians in the crowd, is actually for whatever that William Datuk Ng was suggesting in his recommendations, and even what Jeff was saying earlier in terms of what government ought to be doing and prioritizing. We have a serious fiscal situation right now, and everybody knows the numbers. I don't have to say much about that. Actually, the decline in share of revenue to GDP, and the fact that fiscal policy is basically the efficacy of fiscal policy, the lever, Putrajaya punya lever of fiscal policy is basically a useless lever. It doesn't work anymore. It's just too small. The whole of the income of the federal government goes to paying OPEX, gaji, pension, supplies, subsidies, and that's it. So the lever, the fiscal lever, the whole Keynesian thingy that everybody studies at school, is just not there. Because what is it in 2022? Because it's an exceptional year, it's 70 billion, 60 something billion. All of it is borrowed. And that is not being spent very, very wisely. So the fiscal lever is not there. So the reform that needs to be done, and it's going to be very, very, very painful reform. And nobody in his right mind, except for people who are in the arena, people like me, will never accept the position to be the Minister of Finance, because, my God, how to look for new revenues and how to cut expenses to make some of these things happen. So I'll end with that, and so sorry to, if I spoil your appetite or anything, but I'll to get some more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mo, for that. I think your presentation, maybe, when we teach economics and we talk about economics, we always see Malaysia as this big international trade country, right? We quote export-import figures, and we say that now you're saying that actually, we have to ask, who is actually exporting and importing? We connected it to the fact that we have millions of SMEs. So what are they getting out of that income? So again, the issue of equity and governance, I think, has been raised by now. All right, time is really bad. So can I just open up for one or maybe just two questions, and then we'll give the speakers 2 minutes maybe to answer. So please, if there's anybody who has a question to the panelists on yes, one, yeah, please, just I suppose there's a microphone, and there's no microphone, and just speak from.
Good afternoon, I'm Charles Say, I'm the UK High Commissioner. Can I raise one thing which seems to me to be a challenge and an opportunity, although the picture is a bit mixed probably between the SME sector and the wider economy, and that is moving towards a low-carbon economy. As you all know, the Malaysian government has signed up to a zero-carbon target in 2050, and I just wondered how you saw that working. I mean, in a sense, it might solve your commodity economy problem, because oil and gas is already a declining industry and will continue to decline between now and 2050. But I'd be very interested in your thoughts on where the opportunities are for Malaysia in this new low-carbon world.
Maybe one more? Okay, if not, then maybe the mic. Sorry. So basically, we'll give speakers a couple of minutes each to address the question and whatever else you want.
I'll answer relatively briefly, if I may. I'm a big advocate of ESG. In fact, I designed the ESG index for the Jakarta Stock Exchange. And in fact, William was just reminding me that when we first met, that was actually one of the key things that I was doing. So, in what I'm about to say, please understand that I am a very staunch advocate of ESG. But for me, the S is the most important priority now, the social element. Now, whilst I understand the zero carbon aims, there is nothing for Malaysia to achieve in that. The emphasis of economic and social policy in Malaysia must be on equity, looking after people, raising people's income, giving people employment opportunities, and the environmental impact of that is a secondary matter.
Thanks, Jeff. Yep.
There's a lot of general perception that the SMEs do not want or are not ready for ESG. That's only partially correct. Most SMEs are already feeling the pressure. These are actually from the demand side. Right? Customers are telling them, look, you have to comply, otherwise you won't take your product. So it's already happening. The challenge, therefore, is twofold. One is impact. Secondly is really the capital. What do we do? A lot of the equipments are from 20 years ago, 15 years ago. We want to replace where the money comes from. Especially with the pandemic hitting us so badly. With the banks telling us, look, we don't have any positive track record over the past 2 years. We're just not going to loan you money. So where's the money coming from? So there's a lot of hand-holding, especially financially, for the SMEs to meet whatever goals it is that we're trying to do.
I'm actually so desperate that it's not just ESG. Any new thing would be something that's welcome. But the issue is, I'm one of those who believe that you can't go from, say, doing one thing to something totally different. So actually, the agents, something that's adjacent to what we're doing, and I think it's possible from the ESG perspective, and that has to come back to the manufacturing base in this country, and that's why the manufacturing base in this country ought to be nurtured and protected, not just to create an ecosystem on the SME side, but also this is the base for which you can go towards finding new growth opportunities in the sustainable space, in the green space. There's been a lot of talk about it, but actually the real people who are going to do it actually will be the ones that are in the manufacturing sectors. And although there are opportunities in energy, there are opportunities in food and so on, but I think most of it will have to come from the manufacturing side. The manufacturing side is actually dominated by MNCs, and the issue now is actually people like the members have to step up and actually then fill up the gap.
Thank you very much, William and Jeff. I think all of us will agree that whatever has been said this morning, it's really just, many of the things may already be known to us. There's a lot of actual work that needs to be done. How do we move? And I think I agree with when we talk about the need for a change, we have to also be very, very cognizant of how we are going to make that change. And that change has also got to be a sustainable change. Right? So especially in the Malaysian context, I think we have a record of being very gradual in whatever we do. And sometimes it's so gradual that people don't even know that we're moving. I think that's a big challenge. But it's important to keep in mind not only we need the change, but also to design how we are going to do that change. Right? We've actually done pretty well. I mean, we've not had much time for interaction here, but we are on track for lunch. So with that, I take the opportunity to thank our three panelists for at least giving the initial thoughts. We will have our lunch and to snack, and we'll come back for the session after lunch, maybe in about half an hour, where we will listen to Sri Anwar, who will give all the solutions that we need to have moving forward to a better future. So with that, thank you very much.